What's up? Welcome in. Adam Jahns here from Hoge and Jahns. Our good friend Adam Hoge he's up in Minnesota, so we want to send our thoughts and prayers to him as he deals with his family matter. Please, we're all thinking of him right now. You can follow him at Adam Hoge. You read his stuff on allchgo.com. I know you already are if you're a diehard. I'm Adam Jahns. You can read me on theathletic.com. I got a story up about Caleb Williams there, where we sort of go back in time. So if you want to read about how he converted a 3rd and 33 with a broken foot in a championship game against a rival, I have that story for you on theathletic.com. So we'll call this an Adam Jahns special. So this is going to be a special guest episode. We have Bruce Feldman, the one and only Bruce Feldman, our college football reporter from The Athletic. I know you've seen him on Fox. He will be joining me. And then we have friend of the show, Scott Dochterman, who covers Iowa and college football for The Athletic. He will be joining as well. And he's a Bears fan. So I think he's feeling some of the same feelings that many Bears fans have right now about the Chicago Bears draft. Caleb Williams is now a Chicago Bear. His number is 18. Rome Odunze is now a Chicago Bear. He will wear number 15. It is a new era of football for the Chicago Bears, and I think Bruce and Scott will give you some awesome insight into what's next for the Chicago Bears. So let's get going. My first guest is Bruce Feldman. Let's bring him in. All right, let's bring in Bruce Feldman. You can follow him on X at Bruce Feldman CFB. He's a college reporter, one of the best college reporters that we have here at the Athletic. You can see him on Fox. He's been doing this for a long time. Bruce, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Let's start with this. You called Rome Odunze your favorite value pick in round 1. Why is that?
There's a bunch of reasons. So I'm going to start with this. He's the guy that coaches and people who have been around him and faced him, they talk about his ability to track the football. It's as good as anybody in this draft. It's probably as good as anybody's in the last few years. He's a big physical kid who is really competitive. And I think the competitiveness may separate him from almost anybody else at the position. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is really smooth and really polished. I don't think either guy has quite the top end speed that Malik Neighbors has. I don't think either guy is as explosive with the ball in his hands as Neighbors. But I think, they're in terms of what everybody wants to coach, what everybody wants to be around. I think you have a guy in Rome. Everybody who comes around him just raves about him and his ability to track the ball, his ability to make catches in tight spaces, and ability to make big plays. I mean, he's good at everything. He's just great at those things. And I'd be very surprised if he does not have a terrific career in the NFL.
Were you surprised that he was there at number 9 for the Bears?
A little. 9. I thought he might be gone. But there was a few things that were a little surprising. There was 3 receivers at the top of this draft that were much better than what we've seen in the last few years, probably since Jamar Chase came out in the NFL. Certainly last year, Jackson Smith and Jigba goes 20. All 3 of these guys are far more complete prospects than him. You had a bunch of quarterbacks though that were going to clog it up to some extent. And I thought Joe Alt, who the Chargers took, is clearly the best offensive lineman in this group, and I think he was worthy of a top 10 pick. Then it just came to fit, and obviously the Falcons, it was kind of a wild card, but it's a huge win. The other thing that surprised me a little bit, but I don't think there was anything else that would probably help them much more, is if you're the Bears and you want Caleb to have as much firepower as possible, you already have 2 terrific receivers. In Keenan Allen, you added a phenomenal route runner who's big and physical and has played a lot. You have obviously DJ who is very dynamic. And now you're going to add somebody who brings in even more juice to that receiver room. I mean, they're giving Caleb a lot of weapons on top of, Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift. And for that to get it, towards the end of the top 10, that's a heck of a pick for me.
I always love your draft confidentials that you do every single year where you get so many great opinions. And I went back to the section on the receivers today. Why do you think he was viewed as like a safer pick, Rome Odunze, maybe as opposed to the other receivers? Like I just got that. I know some of them use that description, but maybe take us behind the scenes a little bit.
One of the coaches I talked to who'd been an offense coordinator in the NFL for a little while, um, really liked Neighbors. But there was one part was like, yeah, there's some stuff you got to remind him we're all in this together, and there's a fire there that is mostly good, but I think maybe a little bit of a caution, because at one point I was like, because things went sideways, obviously in Buffalo with Stephon Diggs. I was like, do you think it's like that? And he was like, I think so. I think it could be like that. And with Rome, you just hear the complete opposite. This is not a knock on Diggs. I don't want it to come out totally like that. But I just think that there is no negatives on Rome. There's nothing like even a hint of it. And so I think safe in that case is a really good way, where you're talking about somebody who has the receiving skills that he has. And it's not like he's like 6 feet, 195. Like, he's a big receiver. He was a track guy in high school. He's very mature. He played in a high level college offense. He played a lot of games. I think he saw a program that went from really bad at 4-8 to playing for the national title game in 2 years. And obviously, Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix Jr. were the two new adds to that. But I think it speaks to him, because I know Rome was one of the leaders of the team that got that turned around and got that program out of the ditch. So I think it's safe, and safe shouldn't make it like, oh, he's like this, guy without any wow factor. He tracks the ball at an elite level. He makes contact. Like, I threw this out a few days ago. It's like one of the guys who I thought was just a money clutch receiver who's played in the NFL, a little while back, but for a long time, was Anquan Bolden. Was just really physical. Rome has some of that, except I think Rome has more top end. He's a little more explosive, and you're going to get better plays, a bit more big plays down the field, I think. And with Caleb and his ability to extend plays, man, it's going to be pick your poison how teams are going to try to cover these guys.
Can I stay with Washington just for a second? Because like the Bears were absolutely shocked at like what the Atlanta Falcons did with Michael Penix. And there was some fear there that maybe a team would jump them and take Rome Odunze. So like, for someone who's been doing this so long, like, what was your level of shock? Like, what do you make of what the Falcons did at quarterback?
So it's like two sides of it. The first side is I am not at all surprised Michael Penix Jr. is a top 10 pick. I thought, to me and to the coaches I've spoken to a lot in this process, he wasn't the most polarizing quarterback in the draft. Drake May was. Drake May can throw the heck out of it, but really sloppy footwork. There was a lot of stuff people were like, okay, I'm not sure I like his pocket presence. It was, things people like, but like, okay, there's definitely some buyer beware. Penix, and I've talked to coaches who faced both Penix and Caleb, and they faced him more than one time. And they're like, Caleb's got a really good arm. It ain't Michael Penix Jr. arm talent. Like, they rave about Penix. But he did have 4 season-ending injuries. Now, he was healthy for the last couple of years. Like, I love that he had real adversity, and he came through the other side in great fashion. So on that side, yes, he's a yes top 10 pick. It's the Falcons part that doesn't add up to me. You just spent a fortune on Kirk Cousins. You have real need on the defensive side of the ball. Now, whether they thought Dallas Turner was the guy to jump for, there was no Lawrence Taylor in this draft. This is not like, next year will probably be a much better defensive draft. This wasn't a good one, but it's still really puzzling to me, because it's all the odd reasons. Like, Michael's going to be 24 soon, and if you're not playing him for 2 years, he's going to be 26. It's not like he's the guy where I would certainly say this for Drake May, but if you wait on, give him a year or two behind somebody, I think that's really good for Drake May. I'm not sure if it's going to help Michael that much. It actually may work against them.
The Bears put so much time into getting to know Caleb Williams, from watching him interact at a dinner with his teammates, with his friends, to the first one-on-one interaction with Matt Eberflus being on the campus of USC, to having him have dinner with DJ Moore, TJ Edwards, and Cole Kmet here in Lake Forest, Illinois. As you're gathering information on Caleb Williams, like, what struck you? What what didn't you like? What were some general themes? Like, you had so much in that draft confidential. I'm sure you even had more. Like,
Yeah.
what were some of the things? Like, what are your biggest takeaways on what you gathered on Caleb Williams?
So he's been in the spotlight for a long time for being a college quarterback who spent 3 years in college. He came up through the QB collective part where he was kind of around. He was around a bunch of NFL coaches. He was kind of anointed by a lot of folks. He did well when he overtook Spencer Rattler at OU, but then he got to USC, and the timing was interesting in that he's really the first college football player who was the star in the NIL era. Now, there's been stars. I mean, Johnny Manziel was a rocket ship, and you had a bunch of these other guys. Leinart, certainly when he was with Reggie Bush out in LA. But he was in the NIL space, and he was a transfer guy. And it was also, he took over a program that was in disarray. Remember, it was an abyss after they fired Clay Helton. It was rudderless, and Lincoln Riley was trying to establish a culture. So I'm setting that up to all say this. It's like he went in there. I think Caleb is intelligent. I think he's got a lot of stuff to like. I think there's some other stuff where you're like, okay, we'll see how this plays out. Because it's not surprising to me that he's making good first impressions. I think the challenge for him and for the Bears, to be honest, to insulate him, and I did this story with Kevin, a couple of days before the draft, on just the ecosystem around him. Love the receivers, love the talent they're putting around him. Not sure what to make of what the quarterback room is going to be like. You don't have a guy in there with him that's been there, done that, and had the pressure of being a franchise guy. That's not it, right? So, at USC, it felt like he was bigger than USC when he was there. I'm not saying he thought he was bigger than USC, but it absolutely took on that vibe. Caleb's gifting beats, for the rest of the team, and Caleb's doing this, and all that stuff can be good, but it also took on a tone of like, it was Caleb and the rest of USC. And I don't think that was necessarily a Caleb's fault, but I think, that team was a mess this year, and I feel like right now with, in going into year 3, Lincoln Riley's having something of a reset. It's like starting over. And I don't, like, I had done a radio show in Chicago like the day after the draft. They talked about like, Caleb's done this and everybody was excited. And I was like, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. It's, I think it'll work well. I mean, they've surrounded him with great receivers and skill guys, but it's like, this is going to be a grind. And, it's like that USC team felt a lot like an AAU basketball team that was very disconnected. It didn't feel like a cohesive.
A lot of transfers, right?
Yeah, but Florida State had a lot of transfers.
Yeah.
A lot of teams now have a lot of transfers. Clemson doesn't, but like Florida State was undefeated with a ton of transfers. Everywhere you look, quarterback, the 3 best receivers, the running back, the 2 best defensive players, they were all transfers. This was different. They were a 7-5 team. They were not that good. Now the defense wasn't very good, and the offensive line, but you just wonder about that. How will this kind of take hold in terms of like, okay, it's all about winning games. It's all about winning games, not trying. Like, go back to this line NFL scout had said to me. It's like, it feels like he's trying to hit the 5-run home run every time. And the coaches I talked to, and there's one specific who I put a lot of stock in because I know what I know the things he said in years past and how some of those guys have turned out, most notably CJ Stroud. And he was like, if Caleb can learn to play on time and read defenses better and go, like there was about 3 or 4 things. It's not to say he can't do it, but it was like, these were not things he was not that good at, in college. And there were other guys that he faced who were better at that. And again, that could be for all sorts of reasons. He's only been in college 3 years. It's not like he was playing for 5 years, but those are the things that are going to be interesting to see what happens when the adversity comes. And again, one of the NFL quarterback coaches made a line to me. He said he's like, there's a lot of wow stuff in there. And some of the stuff is like great, he can do that. But it was like, you can't do that when you're being rushed by Myles Garrett. And there's maybe only one Myles Garrett, but there's a lot of dudes who are like way better than anything he saw in the Pac-12, or the Big 12 for that matter.
Do you think, just in terms of like the persona, um, I've talked to a couple scouts about this, just like Caleb Williams being like the first like NIL superstar. I don't know if you think this is a trend, because I'm trying to think of who else could be that person, be that quarterback in the future. Maybe, Archie Manning. I'm not sure. I don't know if you have another name that comes to mind,
Well,
but like,
I think, Adam, what's different though is it was the circumstance that came with it. Like Bryce Young made a bunch of money outside of Alabama from national ad campaigns because he was a Heisman guy who came back, but he was at Alabama. And what was different was he was A, in Tuscaloosa, B, he was in Nick Saban's program. It was already a well-running machine. What's different is when you're in, this is the USC is in the biggest media market there is for college athletics. Like obviously New York's a big media market. There is no college football in New York to speak of. USC has this um, big machine behind it. It's a disconnected machine to some extent, but like there are people just desperately waiting for USC to get going and looking for the buzz, whether it's Colin Cowherd trying to jump on anything or, you name it, it's that. And I think so you had the NIL piece, you had the excitement of Lincoln Riley's trying to get this thing turned around. And in the first year, they did very well. But then the next year, when the aura built bigger because he was the Heisman winner, because it was his draft year, there was a lot of stuff. I think, these conversations come up, and I know, one of the coaches I talked to who's very connected at USC was like, nobody says anything very negative, but you start kind of decoding some of the things that do get said to you, and you're like, okay, we'll see how this is or whatever. And, I would go back like probably the last one quarterback who came out and like, I'd be really surprised if he didn't turn out to be a terrific NFL player, was like Joe Burrow. I would go to that. Like I thought CJ was going to be very good. I thought CJ was an easier pick than Bryce, in part because he's just a bigger guy too. But this group, I'm not like, I don't feel as strong about any one of these five guys. I could see it not going great about any one of the six guys. I'm sorry, Bo Nix, I'll throw it and left you out. But, I could see it not working for sizable reasons.
did you, from what you gathered, did you see maybe a sizable grade? I'd call it grade difference from Caleb and the other guys. Maybe I'm trying to go off what you said
Yeah.
there. Or
Caleb to me has a better arm than Jaden. He's also played less. Jaden, is a couple of years further along. Jaden had 2 first-round receivers. Caleb had good receivers. Obviously, Caleb had Jordan Addison the year before, who was a first-round receiver. And I think Jaden had a better offensive line, much better, because a couple of those guys, I think, maybe first or second-round picks next year. But he was doing it in the SEC. Caleb was doing it in some version of like the West Coast version of the Big 12, or what was the Big 12 that Patrick Mahomes and Baker played in. And I, I don't think there's a huge gap to me because of some of the intangibles. I'm a little bit hesitant on. I don't want to say I'm skeptical, but I was just like, I'm a little hesitant on it just because, again, the defense was bad. The offensive line wasn't good. I get it. They were not going to be a playoff team, but they were, there were games. The Notre Dame game was not a good game for him. It was a big stage game on it, like against their biggest rival. And, he got a few times by Al Golden, the defensive coordinator, and Marcus Freeman. And I don't know. I just felt like when things didn't go right, they just kind of like, it's asking a lot of a quarterback to kind of be the face of a program and then also, kind of be the savior where everything is going that way. And for whatever reason, that just, that part I think was like, if he had come out if he could have come out after 2 years, I think there probably would have been more resounding, oh yeah, totally sold that he's going to light up the NFL. This year, because of it just felt like the NIL stuff got a little more fragmented or frayed, and I just felt like there was a little more drama around there. The team wasn't as good, um, and maybe that exposed a little more stuff about like, okay, how is this going to be in terms of like, is he going to be the guy that's going to lead the franchise to a Super Bowl?
But
So
you
big.
still like but you still like his selection though, right? Like I'm already
You
I
can't
want
not take him is how I looked at it.
yeah.
I just didn't think you could take, like, because there's definitely stuff you can ding Jaden on. I don't think anybody looked at Jaden as the first or second pick of the draft 4 months ago, but credit to him. He really blossomed as a passer, um, and he played very well in big games. But again, quarterbacks, like so many of them, it's a crazy percentage that the NFL misses this much on top quarterbacks. And I know there's more than one thing that goes into it, but it's such an intangibles position that, look, I get why the Bears bombed with Trubisky. That was like, it's easy to say this now. Um, Justin Fields, maybe in the perfect environment, could be a real problem for the NFL defenses and everything like that. It's also like they pulled the plug it's not like his career is over, but it's just hard because I think when they look at the evaluation, they get caught up in the great stuff and why they think it can be great. And sometimes it's the other stuff that ends up tripping up the guy, whether it's how they respond to adversity, their work ethic. I mean, there are guys that I thought were close to can't misses over the last 20 years. And then you find out the reason why they actually didn't work out great in the NFL a handful of times just because they did not have the commitment to grind and do the stuff that really it takes, like because there's Patrick Mahomes talent, there's Josh Allen talent, but then there's a lot of other guys where it's like you're in that range of you can be a very good quarterback, but you have to be on top of everything. And there's a lot of guys who I think get by in college just by being that much more talented or the talent around them or the system around them. And I think that masks a lot of stuff for the NFL.
So before I let you go, this is my last question, and let me just read you a line from your draft confidential, just to see if, or no, it wasn't your draft confidential. It was your analysis after the fact.
Okay.
Hoping you could elaborate on it. Based on what I've seen and heard from folks I trust, I wouldn't bet against Williams.
Yeah, I think it's because he can do a lot of spectacular things. I think it's also because he is very intelligent. I think what would be huge for them is just the football now being the thing. And because you talk to enough people around there, and I live out there, there's just not there's a little bit of the vibe that there was like too much about like what he's wearing, and there was a lot of peripheral stuff. And it's not to say he'd be the first quarterback who like or first NFL star, but certainly that position is different than whatever position that he was seemed to be very calculated in this and that. And those are the things you kind of like, okay, is that a tell? Is that something? But the other things where I think of it just like, hey, do you want to be great? Do you really want to be great? It wasn't about being the first pick in the draft. I mean, that's congratulations. That's a great honor. But it's like this now it starts. That was a small step to the big step. And from what I've heard from people, they're like, no, he's got that in him. But, we need to see that from the guy who jumped in the co-pilot's chair with Lincoln Riley and almost made it to the playoff the first year, right? Like if he doesn't like pull his hamstring on a run against Utah, they probably make the playoff. So based off of that part, and like I said, a lot off the first year and the first impression, he makes good in first impressions. I think he has a good chance, and I also think because they stepped up and they surrounded him with three great receivers. Like I think Rome's going to be a great NFL receiver. I think Keenan he's as good a route runner as the NFL's had in a while, and he's a big guy. And then you have another guy who's really dynamic with the ball in his hands. Like the Bears have given Caleb, the keys to like, I mean, you know this obviously. So it's like
Yeah.
that stuff makes me think um, it will work. It's just I could see him putting up huge numbers, but maybe, it's another story you're gonna have to probably beat Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. You're gonna have, like, and I don't, that's a good problem to have if you're talking about them as a legit playoff team, because obviously the quarterbacks they've had the last couple times, well, whatever, Cade McNown and Grossman and the four, they weren't of that ilk. This
Yeah.
this guy at least is of it. It's just we're gonna find out a lot more about him because I don't think any of us know. None of us know. I don't even think Lincoln Riley knows. Like he may say, but until we find out what it's like in the NFL and how he responds to it, nobody knows. I think even the guys, the QB collective guys who met him when he was 16, 17 and kept in touch, whatever, and they know the NFL world, you just don't know because it's like, he's not in that bubble and he's not getting pounded and he's in a major media market and he's in a town where the first round quarterbacks have all floundered, so, and he's also,
He hasn't lost to the Packers yet.
yeah, and he's in a good division. By the way, he hasn't played in really crappy weather either.
So I've covered the team, just going off what you said about like the situation. I've covered the team since Lovie Smith, and like this to me rivals what Jay Cutler had in 2013 with Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, Martellus Bennett, Matt Forte, and then I just look back and how that good situation imploded for a lot of reasons. They had the worst defense in Chicago Bears history that year, but just in terms of talent on paper, it's the best I've seen in a long time. So, Bruce, I can't thank you enough. I've been a big fan of yours forever. Hoge Jahns reads you, listens to you as well. If you're listening right now or watching on YouTube, if you're not, follow Bruce on Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. College football extraordinaire for The Athletic, and watch him on Fox.
Thanks, Adam. I can't wait to see how this plays out. I'm so fascinated by what's going on with the Bears right now. So
yeah,
must see TV.
Should be fun to cover. Another new era of quarterbacks here for us to see.
And then some.
Yes. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks,
all right, let's keep this college conversation going. Scott Dochterman, friend of the show, Iowa expert extraordinaire, college football reporter for The Athletic. What is going on, Scott? And Bears fan. Scott, how are you?
I'm doing well, and it was a very entertaining weekend to watch this and to grade this, for The Athletic.
You gave Karan Amagaji a C-.
I'm sure I'm going to hear some heat. I had some heat last year too.
You didn't expect that to be the first question. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. No,
I'm messing with you.
Yeah, you know how that goes. It's kind of heat of the moment, but I guess at that point I thought more developmental tackle at that stage when they didn't have a second round pick. I thought that's probably. But I'll tell you what, for their fourth and fifth rounders, I would have gave them really high marks.
Yeah. So so you're watching the picks come off the board. Like I'm curious. You track the Bears. You follow the Bears. College football is your business. Like, what did you want the Bears to do with the third round pick? Like I thought offensive tackle was a real option. I knew they had Karan in for an official visit, so I knew it was a possibility you're getting in that range. But for me, I'm thinking, like, where's the pass rusher? Where's the three technique? So what were you thinking in that situation?
That's what I was thinking at that point, and especially looking at the draft. I certainly did not expect them to trade into the fifth round to get Austin Booker. But Austin Booker was somebody that I thought, in the third round, if he would have gone there, that's an easy B for me because he's got incredible upside athletically. And he was a kind of a one-year wonder at Kansas because he didn't do anything at Minnesota, and they really could have used him to do something there. But he would have been the third rounder that I probably would have gotten excited about for the Bears. So the fact that they traded back into the draft, even though they gave up a little bit next year for him, I thought was tremendous. I thought at that point when you're talking about, Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, and it's like, do you not believe in Braxton Jones? And that's your only day two pick. It seemed more developmental. They could fool me, of course, and he could end up starting for him in a year or two, but I just felt like a pass rusher was more what I thought would have been the better pick.
So you're at Iowa and you're watching the greatest punter of all time? Like, tell me about his story, you covering him, and then like, well, how about this? What's the furthest or farthest punt you've seen from him? Maybe it's in practice, maybe it's him messing around. Like, when did you know, like, this kid's for real?
It probably wasn't the actual boots. It was maybe in practice the second year, because the first year was COVID. And he kept, I think it was in spring football, windy day. And every one he'd hit would hit inside the 5 and either stick like, like he hit a nice golf shot, or it would move laterally instead of into the end zone. And there was probably 10 punts and 8 or 9 of them went that way. And I went, wow, this guy is amazing, just with what he's able to do and the directional punting that he's able to accomplish. And he's got a really cool story, Adam, because he was 22 when he came to the United States. He just got out of college, or got out of high school, or whatever they do in Australia, and wasn't sure what exactly he was wanting to do. And then, he started, was like, well, I kind of like kicking balls around, and played some Australian rules football, and then decided to go to this Pro Kick Academy down there. And right before COVID, so like in that December, January area, LeVar Woods took a trip to Australia to meet him and to go through everything. They signed him, and then COVID hit. So he was stuck in Australia. He ended up before he came to the United States that summer, he ended up having to go to Sydney to quarantine. He's from Melbourne, and then came to the United States. Then he had to come to Iowa City and quarantine again in a hotel room before he could join his teammates for spring or for fall camp. And then he was the best punter in the Big Ten his first year, and he never even seen a football game in person. And his first games at Purdue in front of nobody, and and during that COVID year, and he made a couple of mistakes. He didn't know, like there was one time there was a bad snap and the ball's on the ground and he kicked it like a soccer ball, and he didn't realize he couldn't do that. But he quickly learned, and I tell you what, the stats are just astounding, Adam. I mean, of his 295 punts, which I'm surprised his leg's still there. He's 26 now. 127 landed inside the 20-yard line. That's 43%. And it goes on from there. Like last year, I tracked kind of not only 20-yard line, because that's kind of arbitrary to me, but, because 32 punts went inside the 20, but 23 were inside the 13. So you're talking about forcing the opposing offense, to come up with an extra first down just to try to score. And that's on top of 40 punts of 50 plus yards. And then, of course, he set the NCAA record for most punting yards in a season, which doesn't speak well to Iowa's offense. Is
that a good thing or bad thing?
4,479 yards. And it was broken from a 1938 record. So, yeah, he's but also his average. I mean, when you're punting that much and your average is 46.3, which is the most for anybody who had more than 250 punts in a season, it shows that he's able to be proficient, to strike where he needs to go, directional in bad weather. He's in the Midwest, and then to be able to do it over and over and over again. And then when he got into like warm weather, he was terrific. One of his best games was in the Citrus Bowl last year.
Matt Eberflus called him a weapon for the entire team. And I'm sure they're envisioning, punts inside the 5 and the defense having that advantage. And, like you said, more first downs to gain. Obviously that favors the defense. There was a celebrity attached to him in a sense. Like, how did you see him handle that? I don't know why I'm thinking of it. Like, I remember covering the Pat O'Donnell mega punt training camp in Bourbonnais. I don't know if you recall this, where every time he took the field, like fans were going crazy. What was it like covering the celebrity of Tory Taylor? And I guess, like, how did he handle that type of spotlight? I mean, he's a punter taken in the 4th round.
It's almost like, how I would kind of compare this to is like when Kerry Wood would take the mound for the Cubs, back in the early 2000s. And he was so electrifying that, usually with a pitcher, you just kind of yeah, if he strikes somebody out, you get excited. But it was like, he's going out. That's kind of the way it was with Torrey Taylor, that like this year, the first time he punted, I mean, Iowa surprisingly scored 2 touchdowns, I think, on their first 2 possessions, and then, scored like 20 more the rest of the year. But after that, but he went out there the first time, he got a standing ovation. He got the loudest cheers on senior day this year. And part of this is, he, in my eyes, he directly won 4 games for Iowa, and they were major games. They were not just like, I mean, in 2021, when Iowa was in a 3-versus-4 game against Penn State at Kinnick Stadium, 6 of his 9 punts landed inside the 20, including the 1, the 2 twice, the 3, the 8, and the 12. And then later on, well, actually a couple weeks before that, against Iowa State, which was the biggest Cyhawk game on record, 10-versus-9, he averaged 51 yards a punt, and he parked 5 inside the 20, the 6, the 9, the 10, the 13, and the 20. And then the next year, this is probably his most infamous game, into the 2022 season opener against South Dakota State. He had 10 punts, 20 were inside, or 7 were inside the 20. And 2 of them went inside the 8-yard line, and both led to safeties, and they won 7-3. And that's where the weapon part of it that Matt Eberflus talked about, and I've seen it up close, because when you have a good defense, and I think the Bears are well on their way to having one, especially after the Montez Sweat trade, is that you back somebody up into the 5-yard line, they think conservatively. They think don't lose the ball. Well, so often that happened. Last year against Wisconsin, for instance, he averaged 50 yards a punt on 10 punts, and 5 of them went over 50 yards, and 6 were inside the 20. Wisconsin didn't have a chance against that defense, Iowa's defense. So they were able to use that. And the other thing is, I think when you look at with Chicago's offense now, with a rookie quarterback and an explosive group of wide receivers, that it's to go ahead, and it's like 3rd and 10 at your own 25, go ahead and throw the ball. We got a punter who can flip the field. We got somebody who can angle it. If it's windy, it doesn't matter, because he's done this before. If it's cold, it doesn't matter, because he's punted in sub-zero at Minnesota and in Iowa, and in the snow, and then in the heat when it's in the, in these different types of things. And then if you're at the plus 50 and you've got a 3-point lead at Lambeau Field, and it's 17-14 with 2.5 minutes to go, and it's 4th and 1, and you're at the 44, and you're like, you know what? He doesn't have as big of an ego to say, I need to get my average up. He's like, I'm going to ding it inside the 5. So that's a weapon for your defense and for your head coach. So he's capable of doing that, which is be aggressive on offense, flip the field, or, hey, we're going to make them go 95 on us with 2 minutes to go to beat us.
Have you ever seen him kick with his left leg? He said he could do it.
I think so. He is ambidextrous, and he's done some rugby style punts. I want to say he tried it once, but he tried a fake punt at Ohio State, and that didn't end well. I mean, he just saw like nobody was there, and then he realized he's not slow, but there's pretty good defenders on there. So I would probably caution him against that. But I haven't seen him kick with the left. I maybe he did, but it might have happened once.
What does the Bears fan inside you think of the Bears draft? And then what does the college football expert reporter think of the Bears draft?
It's just I'll say the first part. It just seems like such an un-Bears draft. And part of that is, watching this team since 1980. The first game I ever watched was Chester Markle returning I was in first grade watching him return the field goal for the Packers against the Bears in overtime. And watching this team before, they've always leaned towards the conservative, apprehensive, risk averse, which would have been sticking with Justin Fields. And actually, if the Bears had, say, the 3rd pick instead of the 1st, they probably, I wouldn't have had a problem with them sticking with that choice.
I'd probably be covering a quarterback competition, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Again.
Right, exactly. But the number 1 pick in Caleb Williams, he's a game changer. He's, I don't want to go as far as Patrick Mahomes. I'm not going to get into that hyperbole now, but he's a difference maker. He's somebody that I think can change games. And the Bears have always, they've had, I seriously, during COVID, I went through all this stuff because I was bored. They've had one quarterback start a Pro Bowl. And that was Sid Luckman after the 1941 season. You got to go back to, you got Trubisky was an alternate that made it, McMahon in 85, Billy Wade in 63, and then Ed Brown sometime in the 50s. So they don't even have a legitimate Pro Bowl quarterback, other than McMahon being hung over out in Hawaii and after the 1985 Super Bowl. So I'm excited. And I didn't think that at 9 they would take Odunze. I thought, well, a Bears pick would be either A, trade down, or B, go with the best offensive lineman and, kind of go from there. No, they're putting the pedal to the metal. And then, as I said, with Torrey in the 4th round, normally I'd look at a punter. If his name wasn't Torrey Taylor, I'd go, what are you doing? But knowing what he's capable of doing, it's an amazing pick. And then finally coming back to get your pass rusher, that's a risk. That's like a Brad Holmes type of choice. That wasn't something I saw out of Ryan Poles. And I was like, wow, this is something different from them. And I think he's got the capability to be, I don't want to go Leonard Floyd, but he's got that potential. He's a really incredible athlete. And if he can, if Booker can be a rotational guy, maybe for a year or two, I think he's got the potential to be a difference maker. And then on the college side of things, evaluating this, with Caleb Williams, you wonder what's he going to be like when times get tough. To be a true evaluator, as I think you mentioned with Bruce, Lambeau Field. What's he going to be like when he loses to the Packers and maybe plays poorly, maybe throws a couple interceptions, and he comes back and everybody's on him. What are they going to do? What's he going to do then? How is he going to react? How are his teammates going to react? Is there anybody there that can get in his face and say, look, we need you to be better? And are they capable of that? Is the coach capable of that? Because Eberflus, at the beginning of last year, I thought he was dead coach walking, and then he came back and, really put some nice wins together. And I think Odunze will be terrific. I think that's his, you got a true X. You got a great slot receiver in Keenan Allen if he's healthy, and then you've got a Z, in DJ Moore that I think is, that trio is as good as I've ever seen from the Bears. So overall, I thought it was a really good draft for the Bears, objectively and subjectively.
The unbelievability part of the draft, I forget the Falcons part because I talked about it with Bruce a little bit, but we knew they liked Odunze, but if these receivers are that good, maybe he's off the board. They're doing work on the defensive lineman, and the offensive lineman. It just makes sense at 9. But then I'm just trying to embolden your point here a little bit because once 9 hit and Odunze's there. I remember sitting next to Kevin Fishman, they're going to take him. They're going to take the receiver over everything we just covered because, well, one, he's available. Didn't think that. Their own simulation said it was 50-50. And then, this is a different way of operating in a sense. But if you're taking a quarterback, you got to find help for him. So, yeah, I'm with you on the unbelievability of this in a sense, covering so many Bears drafts where, they're talking about Jay McClellan. And, even to your point about Leonard Floyd, I thought Leonard Floyd turned out to be a really good pick. If Austin Booker becomes Leonard Floyd, that's a home run pick in my opinion. That selection would be, especially in the 5th round. But I'm with you. I don't want to say there's some shock to it, but the Bears do seem to be functioning differently now under Ryan Poles.
It's like, as a fan, and I'm sure most fans thought this way, is it's exciting when you get a receiver, when you get a skill position player. It's like, wow, we got a quarterback who's the best quarterback, the one that everybody thought we should get. And it's like the skeptic inside of you always thinks they're not going to get the guy I want. Well, they did. He was there, and they didn't bypass him. They didn't trade him. They didn't trade the pick. He was available, and they took him. And you're surprised that they actually took that guy and got that guy. So that's what makes this so fascinating. And as we know, and from watching it, covering it, or whatever, the Bears have never had that kind of an explosive offense. I mean, like I remember Eric Kramer, in 1995, kind of being explosive a little bit, or Gary Croton's teams with Marty Booker and Demarcus Robinson, just those kinds of guys. And now here we are, Bernard Berrien back in with, and then the quarterbacks that they've taken, they've all been risky. Trubisky moving up a spot for him. And it kind of felt like a little bit like Drake May, not because they went to the same school, but just because unproven 1-year starter, and it turned out not to work. And Rex Grossman was the fourth quarterback taken. And those are always, I don't know what the percentages are. I think that in the first round, we can see that there's a true bell curve between the A's and F's, and there's a lot more D's and F's than there are A's and B's. But out of the fourth quarterback taken always seems to be the one that never seems to work out. And Cade McNown was the worst one of all. But this one to me is different. He was the number one quarterback. It wasn't like, we took Penix at 9. It was, you took number 1. And so now they have a cast around him, which they didn't necessarily. I thought Fields was a good pick. I still do. I'll go to my grave on that one. But not with Trubisky. They just didn't have the surroundings. They didn't allow him to succeed. And so now I think with Caleb Williams that they have a cast of characters. Now he can go out and do his thing. And my prediction is he's going to win a couple of games that people are going to be really excited about. And he's going to have a couple of really bad games, and probably against a rival or two.
And that's okay. That should be part of the expectation. Those are realistic expectations. So if you had to critique the Bears situation, where would you start? If you had to look at it with the most critical eye. So I'll go through it. You got Odunze, you got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, DeAndre Swift back there with Roschon Johnson. You have an offensive line of Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Ryan Bates, Nate Davis, Darnell Wright. Good-looking offense. Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown. You have Kerry Joseph. You have Ryan Griffin as an assistant QB's coach. He brings some experience. He's supposed to be that veteran quarterback who just happens to be a coach now. Does that make sense? And then then you have Flus, which he's a defensive-minded head coach. The defense, he's got his new look, so that's got to be part of it too.
Yeah.
The defense, top 5 in a lot of categories over the second half of the season. It all looks good. A lot of it looks good. But if you had to critique it, be critical of it, where would you start?
I'm probably more skeptical than critical of them right now, because you wonder, was that just a late season surge against a lot of so-so teams other than the Lions that allowed them to be successful late in the year? I do love Montez Sweat. I thought that was a brilliant trade, as much as the Chase Claypool trade was a disaster the year before. I think this was equally, or in the opposite direction, 180. I look at maybe this, Shane Waldron is a little bit of a question, because, out of Seattle, there were, but I don't think he got a ringing endorsement from, Jackson Smith and Jigba, for instance. They were so-so. I thought he did a nice job with Geno Smith, but, he's still kind of a marginal quarterback. So I guess I question that a little bit, but overall, I like the way they've built this team. They a couple of years ago, it was defensive backs. Last year, I was critical or questioning the going into the free agency with all of that money and then plucking a couple of linebackers. And will that pay off, rather than say a Javon Hargrave or somebody like that? Now, overall, I want to see either an edge. And then last year, I was most critical when they picked Darnell Wright over Carter at defensive tackle. I want to see, can they develop, or can they bring in somebody else on the defensive line? That's probably where I would start. And then can Eberflus be the head coach, and can the defense still thrive? Because I think he's proven his chops as a defensive coordinator, but can he be a head coach? And when the games get close, and I think this team's going to be very competitive for a playoff spot, can he go and beat Detroit, Green Bay, another team, when it really matters?
Yeah, to your point, there seems to be a lot of unfair expectations being put on like Javon Dexter this year to take a next
Mhm.
step in his career. I know he was a second round pick. He's got a lot of high end traits. Seems to have all the work ethic things that you want. It fits that hits philosophy that Eberflus has. But we'll see. The Bears didn't sign a replacement for Justin Jones. We got a big deal in free agency with the Cardinals, if I remember correctly. But yeah, up front, pass rush. As good as that defense was last year, Scott, I've brought it up 1,000 times, I feel like, in the show. Still had one of the worst pass rush rates, the worst pass rush rate in the entire NFL.
Yeah. And that's why getting somebody like Booker, because if they would have gone the entire draft, and of course they only had 4 picks, but if they would have gone the entire draft and didn't get something to infuse the pass rush, I think then you could be really critical. But I think coming up, not as a win is now. I mean, you're giving up what was a 4th rounder for a 5th rounder. Is that how it turned out?
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, you're coming into the draft, you're grabbing a guy that most people had as a 3rd round projection that's got a lot of upside, no problem there. And I think now it's a matter of they've got some salary cap space. See what happens with the June 1st cuts. Anybody left that can fill in, if nothing else, be a rotational guy up front, win some pass rush situations, or manufacture it, with a linebacker or something. But otherwise, for the first time in a few years, I feel pretty positive about this team that's got a chance to be not only competitive, but like when they played the Saints in the playoffs a few years ago, we knew that was a one and done team. There was no chance. But you feel like with this unit, with a quarterback that's capable of doing something, with a defense that's moving in the right direction, that if you get in the playoffs, there's no reason why they can't compete. I think they're right there.
There seems to be some staying power, or at least that the Bears hope. So,
Yeah.
Scott, thank you so much. If you're watching, listening, please follow Scott on Twitter. That's DOCHTERMAN. Did I get that right?
You did, yes.
Maybe we'll have Ken put that on the screen for YouTube. Covers college football for The Athletic. Does great things on Iowa as well. So be sure to read and follow Scott. Thank you, Scott. Good catching
thanks,
up.
Adam. Yep.
All right, that's a wrap on another Adam Jahns special with special guests. Thank you to Bruce and Scott for joining the show. I hope you enjoyed their wonderful insight. Follow them on Twitter. Check out their awesome stuff on The Athletic. Just 2 great college football reporters for us. Just so much information, so much detail, so much insight. So be sure to check out Bruce and Scott's stuff. That does it for this show. We'll be back later in this week. I think the Fishman will be joining me to really put a bow on all things draft related as we get into the off-season program with the Chicago Bears. Adam Hoge will be returning next week. Thank you, as always, for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Hogan Jahns. You know me at Adam Jahns. Find our stuff, our golf shirts, which I'm wearing right now on YouTube. And we got awesome pullovers there as well on obviousshirts.com. So please check that out. So thanks for listening. We'll be back very, very soon. See ya.